In the summer of 2010, as I was beginning my teenage years, my family and I went on a trip to a city hotel. The specific reasons behind our choice elude me. Many family members and friends accompanied us, staying in adjacent rooms. I've never asked about why we picked that particular trip, as it's not crucial to this story. I should note that I've always been a bit timid, slender and delicate, easily startled, even to this day. However, this encounter stood out, and it wasn't just my typical inclination to spook myself. Reflecting on it now, I understand how lucky I was to follow my instincts. The hotel had an unconventional layout. Its lobby was on the 4th floor, not at ground level, a detail that struck me as peculiar. Getting to the lobby necessitated the use of an elevator. There was no direct staircase access. Being aware of this beforehand would have been beneficial, as you'll soon learn. The hotel itself was arranged in a square shape. Every floor featured a balcony that overlooked the lobby and cafe area beneath it. Essentially, while strolling to your room, anyone on your floor could see you if they happened to step out and look around. I had this fear of accidentally slipping over the balcony and falling 8 stories to my demise, but thankfully, the railings were quite high, alleviating my safety concerns. The first few days were enjoyable. My friends and I spent the time playing cards or watching TV. During the evenings, we wandered through the hotel's hallways, exchanging ghost stories and enjoying ourselves, although the reason behind our trip remained unclear to me. Yet, on the 3rd day, things suddenly took a strange turn. I woke up to piercing screams coming from outside my door. Because of the hotel's layout, sounds from the lobby echoed up to the upper floors. Intrigued, I ventured outside to investigate and promptly looked over the balcony to identify the source of the commotion. I saw a girl lying on the floor amid a mess of eggs and spilled milk. Worried people hurried to help her, urging others to call for help. She seemed unconscious, perhaps having fainted or worse. Looking around the lobby, I noticed my family and a few friends, equally unsettled by the scene. Eager to understand what happened, I quickly made my way downstairs to join them. The elevator was at the far end of my floor, so I chose the stairwell next to my room. We were on the 7th or 8th floor, so I figured I'd only have to go down about 4 flights, an easy distance. I descended, keeping an eye out for the number 4 or the letter L indicating the lobby. I expected to come across a doorway to the lobby after passing the 5th floor. However, after going down 2 more flights, I realized there were no doors marked for the 4th, 3rd, or 2nd floors. Maybe I should have turned back then, but tiredness affected my decision-making, pushing me to keep going down instead of facing the climb back up. As I descended, I passed by eerie side corridors that led to dark areas with pipes and wiring. Though I was curious, I chose to ignore them. Finally, I reached the lowest floor, a cold, dimly lit space enclosed by cinder block walls and concrete floors. Ahead were a set of double doors. Despite some hesitation, I assumed they would take me back to the lobby. Carefully, I pushed the doors open and entered a large warehouse-like area, roughly the size of a small basketball court. There was minimal light coming in from the stairwell behind me, so visibility was poor. It appeared to be the hotel's storage space. Squinting to see better, I spotted an elevator at the far end of the room. I closed the door to the stairwell and started to make my way through the dimly lit area. The room had an overwhelming sense of humidity and dust, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. As I approached the elevator, I observed it was slightly larger than the ones on the upper floors or in the lobby. Despite pressing the up button, there was no response. Instead, I noticed a card swiper next to it, likely for employee access only. I turned back toward the stairwell doors, weaving between chairs and tables along the walls. To my dismay, the door was locked. The reality sank in. I was stuck in the dim and dusty basement of the hotel. I didn't have a phone. My parents didn't allow me to have one until after middle school, so I couldn't call for help. Everyone probably thought I was still in my room asleep, which heightened my panic as I worried that no one would come looking for me. I felt desperate, scouring the warehouse for other ways out. Some parts had slightly better lighting, so I focused my search there initially. After some time, I found another set of doors, but unfortunately they were also firmly locked. I was overcome with fear and started crying, convinced that I would be stuck in the basement forever. Though it felt like a long time, only a few minutes passed before I heard a door creaking open. It wasn't the stairwell door. It was the second locked door I had come across. Out stepped a slim, middle-aged man wearing a lab coat. If I were my present 21-year-old self and came across a man in a lab coat in a hotel basement, I'd probably be quite puzzled. But as a 12-year-old back then, seeing an adult who seemed knowledgeable brought an immediate sense of relief. Tearfully, I walked up to him, and he appeared just as surprised to see me. "What are you doing down here?" he asked in astonishment. Shaking, I explained that I had gotten lost trying to reach the lobby and ended up locked inside. "Do you have a key?" I asked, desperate to get out of the situation. He didn't respond to my question about the key, but instead said, "I know a way out of here. Come with me." Despite his words, he seemed uneasy. In the dim light, I could see sweat beads on his forehead, glinting behind his glasses. As I followed him, my anxiety intensified. We walked past the stairwell door and headed toward a darker, less visited area of the basement, away from the elevators. His behavior indicated that he was unsure of his surroundings, frequently checking as if the place was unfamiliar to him. As we turned a corner, moving toward a stack of boxes that led to a dead end, a sudden realization struck me. I felt that something was seriously wrong. This man seemed disoriented, not connected to the hotel in any manner. My voice trembled as I questioned, "Where are we going?" He turned back, saying, "This way, just keep following." I knew there were no doors near those boxes. I had already checked when I found the stairwell door locked. I have to credit whatever force guided me for the idea that came to mind next. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, so loud that it instantly gave me a headache. The man, clearly annoyed and covering his ears, shouted back, insisting, "What are you doing? Shut up." Ignoring his demands, I kept on yelling, though I can't remember for how long. Eventually, the man lost his temper and quickly moved toward me. I ran as fast as I could toward the stairwell doors, desperately hoping they would somehow magically open. He didn't run after me but followed closely, shouting insults like "foolish child" and other unkind remarks. I was just a few steps from the door when someone burst in. My rescuer was a hotel janitor who had heard the noise from the stairwell. Seeing the situation, a young me and a stranger in a lab coat trapped in a locked basement, he quickly told me to stand behind him. The janitor asked about the man, and I told him I had no idea. He had come through the door on the opposite side of the room. I pointed towards the door, prompting the janitor to quickly communicate over the radio that he found a child in the basement. He spoke softly to avoid alarming me and said something along the lines of, "There's a man who came from outside, get security," or something similar. The man in the lab coat tried to explain his presence, claiming he was just looking for a restroom. However, the janitor remained skeptical, repeating phrases like, "Let's wait for security to arrive, they'll handle this." Amid this confusing situation, I stood next to the janitor, trying to make sense of it all, completely bewildered. Soon, someone from the front desk arrived and escorted me back up to the lobby, where I found my family, who, to my surprise, hadn't noticed I was gone. Tearfully, I told them what happened, and they hugged me tightly, deeply grateful to the employee for helping me. Sadly, I never had the opportunity to thank the janitor. Looking back, I'm still in the dark about why the man was in the basement in the first place. I don't have any details about what happened later or who he was. However, I do know that the incident with the girl in the lobby was separate, an issue seemingly linked to low blood sugar. As I've thought about that day a lot, the only conclusion I can come up with is that the door I found in the basement probably led to the city streets, which is how he got in. I still have no idea about his intentions, why he was wearing a lab coat, or why he pretended to know a way out. On a recent Monday, my colleagues and I came back to our hotel after a day's work in the field. Rebecca and I headed towards our respective rooms. As we approached, I opened my door and noticed someone in the bathroom. I greeted them, but there was no response. Initially, I thought it might be a housekeeper for some reason. Then, I noticed the person holding my bag with my clothes. I alerted my co-worker saying, "There's a woman in my room." After that, I directly asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" Things get a bit hazy from here because I can't recall all the details of what I said or what she said. She kept murmuring about how her key still worked, repeatedly emphasizing that it still worked, and that's how she gained entry. I was stunned, and she appeared quite flustered, clearly caught in the act of some kind of theft. She dropped my bags and started rummaging through her purse and a white plastic bag. At this point, my coworker was standing behind me, witnessing the chaos unfolding. The woman was hurriedly moving towards the door, and I asked her, "What's in the bag?" thinking it might contain my belongings. She responded, No, it's just my things, I'll show you." And she did. I checked, but I didn't spot anything that belonged to me. In a state of shock, I allowed her to leave. Once she was gone, I entered my room and found it had been ransacked. I quickly glanced around to check if anything had been taken. All of my electronic devices were untouched. Then I went to the bathroom and found my underwear, bikini, and clothes stuffed randomly into my bags. Even my passport was in there. Upon checking the counter, I realized she had accessed my medication. At that moment, I was driven by the urge to retrieve it, so I dashed out to find her. I rushed downstairs to the laundry room and searched around the hotel's perimeter, but she was nowhere in sight. I came to the realization that I wouldn't be able to find her, so my coworker and I went to the lobby to report the incident and then called the police. Returning to my room, we waited. That's when I noticed a metal bat on my bed, slightly larger than those novelty wooden bats you can get at a baseball game, but with a flashlight attached at the end. It seemed she had left it behind in her rush. Additionally, there was a necklace she must have dropped from her bag while she was scrambling with mine. At that moment, I was mostly panicking because I feared she had taken off my essential medication. When the police arrived, they took our statements and inspected the room. I noticed bits of drywall in the sink and mentioned it to the officers, but none of us could figure out where it came from. We examined the door and windows to see if she might have forced her way in, but there were no signs. We were left assuming she might have had a spare key or found another way in. Despite the hotel front desk's insistence that it was impossible, the officer who arrived called for 2 more officers as backup, suspecting the woman might still be nearby. After our statements were recorded, there wasn't much more they could do, so they departed. I sat down to make some calls to inform people about the incident. While on the phone, my mind kept going back to the drywall in the sink, and it still didn't add up. While on the phone and staring at the drywall in the sink, I noticed the mirror hanging on the wall above it. Suddenly, it struck me. I called my coworker over and asked for help in removing the mirror. We took it down, revealing a hole just big enough for someone desperate to squeeze through. I consulted Brian and Rebecca about calling the police again to inform them of this discovery. My boss mentioned there were still 2 police cars in the parking lot, so I headed down to inform them. The female officer seemed a bit dismissive, but the younger officer offered, "I'll take a look." Both officers returned with me, peered into the hole, and discovered a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothes, and toothbrushes. This woman had been residing behind the wall, behind my mirror, for who knows how long. It was unsettling to realize she had access to me and my room at any time. One of the officers contacted the initial officer to return and take photos of the scene. She briefed him on the situation, and all I heard over the radio was an exclamation of disbelief. He returned, took photos, and was just as astonished as the rest of us. Naturally, we swiftly packed up and left. What's even more astonishing is that she might have been there for a long while. During our last stay at that hotel, I would occasionally catch a whiff of cigarette smoke, assuming someone was smoking in their bathroom, unaware it was likely traveling through the vents from where she was hiding. But it turns out, a drug addict was smoking just on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms as well. The holes in the walls were from a renovation, and the hotel hadn't properly sealed them, just covering them up with mirrors. She could have been lurking in people's rooms when they were away. Anyway, this whole situation was insane, and I'm taking some time off. This happened when I was 15 years old, and even though I'm 25 now, I'm still uncertain about how to process it. Back then, I was enjoying life, and it seemed to translate into my dreams. Most of them, especially the ones with any sexual elements, had a positive tone, at least the ones I could recall. Sure, like anyone else, I had nightmares, and I still do, but they either weren't that intense or I forgot them quickly. That was all about to change during a family vacation to Branson, Missouri, a place some call hillbilly heaven. Every year my family aimed to choose a new destination for our vacation, and this time it was Branson. We had visited once before when I was around 10 or 11, but since then, it had expanded with numerous new attractions, particularly musical theaters. We had just arrived from Oklahoma City, so everyone in the car was exhausted. My parents were sticklers for planning, so our hotel rooms were prepared upon our arrival. I suppose, given that my brother and I were reaching an age where we could be relied upon, we were given our room. Then again, maybe they just wanted some peace. Either way, the room was delightful. It even had a small living area with a TV, and we indulged in playing Call of Duty for about an hour before we decided it was time to hit the hay. As usual, our folks had us up at the crack of dawn, a routine that never quite made sense to me. I always thought the whole point of a vacation was to unwind and relax. Instead, by 8 a.m., we were up and then had to wait around for another 2 hours until they were ready. Once they were finally prepared to go, my dad would drive us from one place to another as if his car was on fire, all the while yelling at Jeff and me incessantly. We couldn't fathom why he was so stressed out and angry all the time. That's perhaps why I prefer staying home during my days off. It always feels more relaxing to just lounge around and unwind. Anyway, during our time in Branson, we did the typical touristy activities like riding the ducks and such. We returned to our hotel around 5 to freshen up for dinner. I think my dad had some idea for us to catch a show at the Presleys or something along those lines, but we got saved from it when my brother fell ill during dinner. The rest of the evening was spent in our room playing the Wii. Jeff began feeling a bit better by bedtime, so we opted to stay up a bit longer playing games. I called it a night around midnight, and before I knew it, I had drifted off to sleep. She arrived at some point, but I'm unsure when exactly. I could sense I'd been asleep for a while because moving felt unusually challenging. Though that might have been part of her ability. It wasn't until later that I glanced at the clock. But that would only indicate the time, not when she entered. Initially, I wasn't aware of her presence, but I could already see most of the room. My brother was sprawled out on his bed, covered half off, the way he usually slept. The low hum of the air conditioner lingered in the room, but it seemed quieter than I remembered. I lay there for a moment, absorbing the tranquility of the surroundings, until I caught sight of a figure at the edge of my vision. I attempted to turn my head to the side for a better view, but it wouldn't budge. It caused a hint of concern, though I wasn't alarmed yet. Most of the room was still visible to me. When I shifted my gaze toward the foot of the bed, our eyes met. Initially, all I could see were her eyes, but gradually, her head seemed to enlarge and emerge from the darkness until it dominated my view. I sensed the rest of her presence, slowly creeping onto my bed in sporadic movements. At that moment, genuine panic took hold of me. Every attempt to budge proved futile. It felt as if I were encased in ice, though devoid of its coldness. Even as I sensed her hands making contact, I remained unable to recoil. I longed desperately to let out a scream, just a single utterance. Tears streamed down my temples, convinced I was facing imminent death. She crept closer, inching up the bed until her face hovered mere inches from mine. This marked the initial instance when the severity of her appearance became apparent. She bore a striking resemblance to the archetypal elderly witch, adorned with hairy moles on her chin and teeth that were both crooked and black. Her breath emitted a nauseating blend of decaying flesh and stale air. At the sight of my tears, an unsettling excitement seemed to grip her. She proceeded to shriek and laugh, tracing filthy, claw-like fingers in small circles on my bare chest. Despite my relentless struggle to break free from her grasp, it yielded no results. The pressure of her presence on my body intensified, making it increasingly difficult to breathe. It became evident that she intended to suffocate me. Aware that survival without oxygen was fleeting, I braced for the inevitable, certain that within seconds, I'd be facing death. As I gasped for what seemed like my final breath, I jolted awake. My body instinctively sought air, triggering a bout of hyperventilation. Gradually, within a minute or so, I regained control of my breath and could comprehend the situation. I remained, lying on my back for a moment, perhaps to reassure myself of my continued existence, feeling grateful for being alive. Gradually sitting up, I inspected my body for any signs of scratches or marks, yet found none. I scanned the room in search of any traces of the figure, but the sole occupant beside me was Jeff, still sprawled out in the same position. It was then that I started to ponder the entire experience. Had I truly been asleep, caught in a nightmare, or was it something more tangible? What I witnessed seemed to match reality. Jeff lay in the same sleeping position as he did in my dream. Could I have seen the entire room while asleep? If so, it would validate the existence of that dreadful woman. Resolving this puzzle that night or ever seemed implausible. I was too frightened to even consider going back to sleep. Glancing at the alarm clock on the side table, it read 4:35 a.m., despite my lingering exhaustion. Fearful of falling asleep, I returned to watching TV. I must have dozed off again because my mom's loud knocking on the door woke me at 7:45. After waiting for over 3 hours, I felt relieved to finally hit the road back home. Despite our weekend getaway, it seemed like everyone was eager for it to end. I certainly was, and not solely because of the nightmare. However, when it seemed like she wouldn't return, my life returned to its usual rhythm. Being my age, I managed to steer clear of family vacations for the remainder of my time at home. I intentionally loaded my schedule with heavy work during those periods to evade them. Though I claimed life had returned to normal, the lingering dread of her potential return lingered in the recesses of my mind. At least once a week I found solace in moments of normalcy. I'm grappling with determining whether it was merely a nightmare or if that entity was truly present in the hotel room with my brother and me. I've delved into some research on sleep paralysis and similar phenomena, discovering that the hag, as many refer to her, is a common element in such experiences. If the terror I endured that night was simply a frightening dream, I hope I've outgrown that condition. Yet, if that woman and her cohort of monsters are indeed real, I can only hope they satisfied their thirst for fear that night and never return. I pray fervently that they never lay a hand on my newborn son. Subscribe if you're interested in more creepy videos.